Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Brilliant as the Sun, retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Part 1, Vidur's Pilgrimage. And we are going to continue from the 6th chapter. We started yesterday, Creation of the Universal Form. Vidur pondered that Maitreya meant by subtle sense organs and what Maitreya meant by subtle sense organs and concluded that these were the templates of the senses. So the subtle sense organs were the templates of the senses. This was the conclusion of Vidur. Eager to learn more, he encouraged Maitreya to explain how the planetary systems developed from the Virat Roop. Verse 27 of chapter 6, Maitreya said, "From his head the heavenly planets or Swarglok were created. From his legs the earthly planets or Bhulok appeared, and from his abdomen came Bhuvarlok, and the planets which rest in the sky in between the heavens and the earth." Within each planetary system, the respective residents were placed according to their modes of nature. Maitreya described the factors that determine where living beings are sent. Verses 28 to 29, those souls who, prior to the last annihilation, had predominantly cultivated the mode of goodness take birth as godly celestials in the higher planetary systems. Those who had nurtured the mode of passion take birth on the earthly planets as humans, and those who had fostered the mode of ignorance take birth in animal species. However, those living beings in the mode of ignorance who had worshipped Shiva take birth in Bhuvarlok. Verse 30, Maitreya then explained how the different social orders of human society evolved from the Virat Roop. O best of the Kurus, after the Vedas appeared from his mouth, so did the Brahmins, because they are inclined to study and teach Vedic knowledge. They are the spiritual masters of all other sections of the human society. Verse 31 to 33. The power of protection was generated from the Virat Roop's arms, along with the Kshatriyas who protect the society from thieves and miscreants. From his thighs manifested the power to produce and distribute grains along with the Vaishyas, who are responsible for creating a sustainable economy to provide for the human society. Finally, the inclination to serve was manifested from the Virat Roop's legs, along with the Shudras. All the classes of people must develop the service attitude toward God, which is the soul's nature. It is better to be a Shudra with this mentality than a Brahmin without it, because only the service mood satisfies Krishna. Verse 34, Maitreya lifted his hands and then pointed at his legs. Since my hands and legs are a part of my body, their proper use is to serve me. Similarly, since all occupational roles in society along with their respective duties are born of the Lord's body, their duty is to serve him. Anyone who desires to attain freedom from material bondage and realize his eternal spiritual existence must worship the Supreme Lord under the guidance of Krishna's representative, the spiritual master. Vidur nodded in agreement. He knew that even if people were not expert in their occupational duties, if they develop a mood of service to Krishna, they can perfect their senses. They can perfect their lives. Material expertise was not as important as spiritual sincerity. The two men had spent several hours talking. Maitreya, realizing that Vidur had not yet eaten, stood up. Picking figs off the tree, he placed them in his cloth before Vidur, along with a few handfuls of wild nuts he had earlier collected. My dear Vidur, you have journeyed far and must be hungry. Forgive me for not feeding you earlier. Please eat your fill whilst I fetch river water to drink. Vidur jumped to his feet and, taking Maitreya's hands in his own, induced him to sit down. Revered Maitreya, your nectar-like teachings were food for my soul. You are as good as my father, and therefore it is not befitting that I sit whilst you serve me. You would be doing me a great favor by allowing me to fetch the water. Maitreya raised his hands in objection. Finally, the two friends went together to the riverside. After he was refreshed, Vidur was keen to hear more about the Virat Roop. On his journey, he had heard much speculation about the nature and dimensions of the universe, and he wanted Maitreya's authoritative conclusion on this matter. Verse 35, Maitreya sat tall and straight, backed, looking out at the expansive evening sky. Who can even estimate, never mind actually measure, the greatness of the universe, he said, raising his arms towards the heavens. Although the cosmos works under the influence of material time and the karmic reactions of the living entities, it manifests from Krishna's spiritual energy, Yogmaya. As such, no one is capable of measuring such a vast manifestation. So, Yogmaya is spiritual energy of Lord Krishna, and the energy which pervades this universe, as we know, it is Mahamaya. Vidur chuckled. He told Maitreya a childhood story he had once heard about a frog in a well. When another frog jumped into his well and told him about the ocean, the first frog was incredulous. He puffed himself up to twice his original size and said, "Is the ocean twice as big as my well?" No, it is much larger," said the newcomer. Again the frog in the well puffed himself up further. "Is it 3 times as big as my well?" This went on until the frog expanded himself so much that he burst and died. Mental speculators who think it possible to measure the universe remind me of that frog, said Vidur. And the two men laughed heartily. Verse 36. When the laughter subsided, Maitreya humbly said, "Whatever I have told you, I have heard from my own spiritual master, the great sage Parashara. I was unable to fully understand everything he told me, but whatever I understood, I have repeated. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to glorify the Lord, for by so doing, I have purified my own consciousness." Verse 37, O Vidur, it is said that the highest perfection of the tongue is to recite Krishna's glories, and the highest attainment of the ears is to hear them. Hearing of Parashar, Vidur affectionately thought of his father, Vyasadeva. Sage Vyasadeva, as we know, was father of Vidur, who was Parashar's son. So Vyasadeva was the son of Parashar, and Parashar was the spiritual master of Maitreya sage, or Maitreya Rishi. Vidur could better appreciate why Vyasadeva was so keen to compile and record Krishna's glories. By so doing, more people would have the opportunity to hear these topics and thus attain self-realization. Verse 38, the two saints sat quietly for a few moments, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Maitreya reflected on the current fascination with discovering the nature of the universe. He too had met sages who were preoccupied with such questions. They would speculate endlessly. When he told them that the space, like all the aspects of the Lord, was inestimable and inconceivable, they would object. Vidur's analogy of the frog in the well accurately described such fools. He looked fondly at Vidur, who like himself was content to hear about and glorify Krishna to the best of his ability, confident that by this process Krishna would reveal how to attain him. After a few moments, Maitreya said, I am sure you know that your father and I enjoy a close relationship. Thus I hope you will tolerate my calling you son. Vidur folded his palms respectfully and bowed his head. I am blessed. My dear son, the expectation that we can know everything is foolish. So this is a very big lesson for all of us, that if we expect that we can know everything, that is thinking like a fool. Even Lord Brahma, despite being the first and greatest scholar and poet in the universe, concluded after meditating for thousands of years that the Supreme Soul is inconceivable. Verse 39, if Brahma cannot properly understand Krishna's glories, how can lesser men like ourselves or the proud mental speculators comprehend them? Indeed, even the self-sufficient Lord does not know the extent of his own potency. Vidur sighed, remembering the proud Duryodhan and his associates who were unable to understand Krishna's greatness. Vidur frequently pleaded with the arrogant prince not to antagonize the Pandavas, warning him that Krishna was their protector. Then, by way of caution, he would recount Krishna's phenomenal achievements. Duryodhan would dismiss them as sorcery. On the other hand, the Pandavas, as Krishna's faithful devotees, appreciated his incredible deeds. Yudhishthir often gave the example of how a small banyan fruit contains thousands of seeds, and each holding the potency of another tree, which again produces countless more fruits, each of which will in turn produce more trees and more fruits. Is this not inconceivable, he would argue? We cannot count the number of fruits that can come from one fruit. Why do foolish people think they can measure the universe? Verse 40, Maitreya interrupted Vidur's thoughts. Neither the Vedas nor the controlling deity of speech can fully describe Krishna's splendor. The same is true of Brahma and Shiva, the controlling gods of the mind and ego. Brahmaji is the controlling god of the mind, and Shiva is the controlling god of the ego. We heard that yesterday. None of the gods, nor even their spiritual master Brihaspati, can understand Krishna. Nevertheless, the faithful devotees know that the only sane course of action is to respectfully offer him our obeisances. So the spiritual master of all the demigods, all the Devi Devtas, is Brihaspati. Vidur recalled the many times he had been challenged by the faithless people. If your God is inconceivable, why talk about him? How could they understand the great inner happiness he felt when discussing Krishna with pure devotees like Maitreya? Because the speculators never experienced this bliss, they had no faith in such discussion. discussions. The devotees, however, had firm faith that Krishna is the Supreme Person, the origin of Vishnu, and the all-pervading Brahman. With this conviction, they relished discussing Krishna's glories. This brings us to the end of chapter 6, the creation of the universal form. Next, we will start on chapter 7, further inquiries by Vidur. Hariam Tat Sat, Hare Krishna. I wish you all a very happy start of the Navratri today. Happy Ugadi, happy Gudi Parva, and also we know that this is the start of the new Vikrami Samvat, the new calendar of our country, India. In India, and for all the people who are following the Sanatan Dharma. Hare Krishna.